Hello, my name is Sascha Preibisch, and today I would like to talk about grant types and how to choose the one for your use case. I've made a video about all grant types that are defined in RFC 6749 OAuth-2, and in this video I would like to help you to choose the correct one. So first of all, what is a grant type? And on a high level you could say it's a client talking about the intention on how to access protected resources on a resource server. So it's more or less like deauthorization server. This is how I, the client, would like to access a protected resource. Because depending on the chosen grant type, the server knows how to handle the authorization flow. But of course, it's not always easy to choose the grant type. It depends on the client type that you're using, if you have a user or if there's no user involved, if it's a JavaScript or maybe a web application. Would you like to support a refresh token? And then of course there are combinations that are valid and that are not valid according to the protocol or the framework. So in order to make this easier to figure this out, I've created an image a while ago for my book about API development, and the image looks like this. So you may need a moment to look at it to understand what it says, but I would like to use this in order to help you read this diagram, which will make it easier afterwards once you know how it works. So before we get started, there's a little glossary here. So code stands for authorization code flow, ROPC, resource owner password credentials, which is the password grant type, RT for refresh token, and CC for client credentials. Where the diagram says explicit consent, it means that a user will be presented with a consent screen throughout the flow. Implicit consent means at that point in time the user has either given his consent or he's providing his consent by simply using a client, using an application. The implicit flow only connects to the authorization endpoint, and the client credentials flow is only used with confidential clients. There's no resource owner involved. This is also shown in the diagram below, but I just had the urge to talk about this before we dive into the diagram itself. The implicit and code flow, those are the ones that connect to the authorization endpoint, and the code flow also talks to the token endpoint, just like the password flow, the refresh token flow, and the client credentials flow. So I call this diagram OAuth-Decision-Tree, although it's not really a tree, but it helps you decide where to go and what to do. So let's say you've got a certain type of application, like JavaScript or mobile application or web application. In those cases, you can start reading this diagram from one of those boxes here. If you want to make a decision based on your use case where you either want to show the user a consent screen or you don't, you may want to start from these lower boxes. So let's say you've got a web application. So by design, your web application is of type confidential. And confidential clients can use one of these flows: the code flow, the password flow, the refresh token flow, or the client credentials flow. With hacking around, they can also use the implicit flow, but not intentionally by design, so to say. If you, from this point in time, want to show a consent screen to the user, you will see that the only connection to this end over here is through the code flow. So only this one will help you or will support the case where the user is presented with a screen where it says grant or deny. The password flow doesn't do that. The refresh token flow certainly also not. And the client credentials flow even less. And if you follow this line, you will see that the client credentials flow ends up right at the right hand side of this box. And I've tried to indicate that where this line here states there's an implicit consent given by a resource owner, and that is not the case for the client credentials flow because there's no user involved, but it's still connecting to the token endpoint. If you have got a JavaScript application or a mobile application, that by design is a public application. And public applications can use all of these flows except for the client credentials flow. As you can see, there's no connection. And then, of course, with the public client, you can choose if you want to use the implicit flow, where your application is only communicating with your authorization endpoint, or you choose the code flow, the password flow, and then later on the refresh token flow. In those cases, you would also connect to the token endpoint. And of course, if you take one of these paths, especially those two here, you can decide again if you want your user to provide explicit consent, or through the resource owner password grant type, you want the user to provide consent by simply using your application. There are two endpoints in OAuth, which are also shown here in this diagram, the authorization endpoint, the token endpoint. There are only these two client types, confidential and public. And this dotted line here, this one and this longer one, indicates the flows that communicate to a certain endpoint. So implicit and code are surrounded by this dotted line. They both communicate with the authorization endpoint. And all the flows surrounded by this longer dotted line or box, they will also or only talk to the token endpoint. So I hope this diagram helps you make decisions when choosing a grant type. And as you can see, you can also start off from a certain flow, and with that it will help you to decide how you're going to implement your application / client or not. I hope this picture helps. You can certainly also print it out just to keep the source information. And with that, please let me know how you like this diagram. Thanks for watching. Please leave comments, especially in this video if you have a question about the diagram. And subscribe if you would like to see future videos and be notified. Thank you.